The time is now for the Dr. Bob Sports Podcast. I am Tanner. I am our head of analytics, and for the past 7 years, I've been working alongside Bob, originating our NFL and college basketball bets. And today, as always, I'm joined by our digital media specialist, Grant. What a season.
What a season this has been. I mean, it's been an absolute blast to watch the NFL this year. It's been pretty crazy. Ton of big injuries, ton of really good teams from last year not being so good this year. So, I mean, it's been a great first year of the podcast, but let's jump right into our first segment where we will be grading the script writers. And this week, we're going to use this section to recap this awesome NFL season we've had here at Dr. Bob Sports. And for clients, the best bets are 50, 26, and 2, which is 65.8%. And the strong opinions are 30, 24, and 2, which is 55.6%. I mean, it's been a good year.
Yeah, great season. One of the best we've had since I joined here at Dr. Bob Sports, and I'm ready to handicap the playoffs where the game changes a little bit. We've also had a nice season on this podcast with the free bets we've given out. So our props that we've sent that we talked about on this podcast are 12-7, and the free sides and totals we've given out are 6-1.
Yeah, those bets have been popping off, and that first one we gave out, of course, lost, but it's been a 6-game heater after that. But
I know, and that was the first half Hail Mary Dolphins under loss on Black Friday. It could be 7-0 on the free sides and totals if it weren't for that crazy play we saw at the end of the first half.
Yeah, I'm still a little salty about that one, but we also went 2-1 on the 3 future bets that we talked about on the August 30th podcast. And we had Raiders over 6.5 wins at plus 125, which is a win. Lions to miss the playoffs plus 150, which is a loss. And then we had Cowboys to win the NFC East at plus 180, which was a win.
Yeah, so we ended up 2-1 on those, with the Cowboys coming out of nowhere to take the NFC East as the decider. And then we've still got 2 Super Bowl bets alive from that podcast as well. We took Bills 8-1 and Ravens 15-1. So those are still pretty good prices right now from that August 30th podcast you referenced.
Yeah, those ones are looking really good. But our next segment is where we've got our free bet of the week. And let's dive into the total that we sent out on Monday for the Dolphins and Chiefs.
Yeah, so clients got a cheap 43, and I still think there's value here as long as you can get over 44.
All right, well, let's start with Miami's offense here. They're getting Jalen Waddle back this week.
Yeah, and he's second in success rate in the NFL, and he gives Miami's offense an elite secondary weapon alongside Tyreek Hill, who leads the NFL in yards per route run. So having both of those guys out there makes a major difference to Miami's offense. Tua averaged just 5.8 yards per pass play the last 2 weeks without Waddle on the field, and he averaged 7.5 yards per pass play in the games with both Waddle and Tyreek on the field.
Yeah, Tua hasn't really been great against the pressure this season. Do you think the Dolphins O-line is going to be able to keep him clean this week?
Yeah, he does have drastic splits based on his protection, particularly on outside throws. So Tua has a 52% success rate on throws outside the numbers when kept clean, compared to just a 31% success rate when pressured and throwing outside. So, you know, when he's not able to step into those throws on the outside, they can sometimes be ducks or just not accurate. But I believe that Tua will be kept clean and be able to make those throws on Saturday night because the offensive line is getting healthier, certainly more healthy than they've been on average this season. So Pro Bowl left tackle Teron Armstead missed 6 games, but he will start this week. And starting right guard Robert Hunt missed 2 games midseason because of a hamstring injury, then returned only to be sidelined for 4 more games. But he will also suit up in Kansas City, and he might be even more important than Armstead because he has conceded only 5 pressures on 314 pass blocking snaps this year, while backup Lester Cotton allowed 20 pressures, so 4 times the amount on 347 pass rushing snaps. And Hunt will be the one to line up across from Chiefs defensive tackle Chris Jones, who leads all interior defenders in pass rushing efficiency. And the other guy I want to touch on for Miami's offensive line has been right tackle Austin Jackson. He's had a solid year, a breakout year. We actually talked about this in the AFC's preview podcast about how Jackson would need to have a breakout year, and he finished third in pass blocking efficiency, and he will line up across from Chiefs edge defender George Karlaftis, who's 17th in pressures, and I think Jackson will shut down Karlaftis here.
All right, we're looking at the Chiefs. Their linebackers have been susceptible for years. Do you think Miami's going to be able to exploit them in the middle of the field?
Well, that's what Spagnuolo does, right? I mean, he'll give up runs, he'll give up, running back passes to make sure he stops wide receivers down the field. I mean, Spags has been great at taking away receivers since he's been in Kansas City. They're always so physical with those guys outside, but the middle of the field suffers because of the focus on taking away receivers. And I think Mike McDaniel, Dolphins head coach, will be able to exploit the Chiefs linebackers. The Dolphins target running backs 7th most in the league. So I think the screen game will be there, particularly for the explosive Devon Achane. And then the Dolphins are 5th in rush success rate this year, and the Chiefs are 28th in EPA per rush allowed. So I like McDaniel attacking these Chiefs linebackers. And we talked about how wide receivers typically struggle against the Chiefs, but the Dolphins use so much motion that the Chiefs will not be able to get their hands on the wide receivers as much as they would be able to other teams. So I like the matchup for Miami's offense from the trenches to the receiving core. And I think Tua is going to have a solid game here.
All right, well, let's move over to the other side of the ball. And we won last week's primetime prop with James Cook under rushing yards because you love this Miami run defense.
Yep, they're the top run defense in the NFL according to our metrics. So I really think the Chiefs head coach Andy Reid is going to put the game on the shoulders of Patrick Mahomes, just like we saw the Bills do last week with Josh Allen.
All right, well, speaking of Pat, do you think they're going to be able to keep him clean this week? I mean, the tackles have been pretty shaky this season.
They have been, but Kansas City's interior offensive line is responsible for just 34% of the pressures. That's second fewest in the league, and they will shut down Zach Sealer and Christian Wilkins, who rank 16th and 17th respectively in pass rushing efficiency among defensive tackles. Now, you mentioned the shaky tackles, the shaky offensive tackles for the Chiefs. That is not going to be much of a problem in this game because the Dolphins will be without their top 4 edge rushers. Jalen Phillips, Bradley Chubb, Andrew Van Ginkel, Cameron Good will all be out. And those 4 combined for 87% of Miami's edge defender pressures this season. The other good news for the Chiefs offensive line is they will be getting back starting left tackle Donovan Smith, who hasn't had a great year, right? You said they've been shaky, but he has been better than the backup rookie tackle, Wanya Morris. So Smith is allowing an 8.9% pressure rate. Morris surrendering a 10.3% pressure rate. So the tackles, they'll be better than they have been for the past month when Smith has been out, and they will be facing the worst edge rushing group in the NFL. I mean, we're working with a team without their top 4 guys on the edge rush.
All right, well, I like to hear that Mahomes is going to be kept clean here, but the real question is, who is he going to throw the ball to?
Well, I think the Chiefs have made a conscious effort to make sure that Travis Kelce is ready for the playoffs. And I think there's no greater example than them sitting him last week and not having him get to his 1,000-yard season that everyone thought he was going to. They have not been utilizing him nearly as much in terms of volume this year. Now, efficiency has still been there, right? Kelce is second in EPA per target among tight ends, which might surprise some people because they're just used to him with so much volume. But he's still been solid when he's been targeted this year, and I think the targets go up in this game. The Dolphins are surrendering a 57% success rate to tight ends. That's 26th in the league. And they will be without starting linebacker Jerome Baker. He had wrist surgery, and backup linebacker Duke Riley is surrendering 2 yards per target more than Baker. So I think, Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes are going to spam the Kelce, curl routes when they can get him lined up across from Duke Riley in those zones. And so I think that Kelce is in line to have a huge week this week if his volume increases now that it's do or die for the Chiefs. And the other thing I wanted to mention in the Dolphins secondary is they're not only going to be missing Baker, but they're also going to be without starting cornerback Xavier Howard, and backup cornerback Eli Apple has not been good. So Howard is surrendering 2 yards per target fewer than Apple. And so Baker and Howard combined are worth 1.5 points to Miami's coverage by our metrics.
Yeah, I'm hoping to see the Chiefs just feed Kelce. They always look their best when they do that. But I'm also seeing a ton online about the weather. How do you think this is going to affect the game?
Well, it's going to be very cold. So the high on Saturday in Kansas City is 10 degrees, and temperatures could fall below zero during this game. But we back tested this every which way you can imagine, and cold does not affect scoring according to our numbers. Wind affects scoring, but the wind speed for this game will be around average for Arrowhead Stadium. So you can draw whatever narratives you want for cold not affecting scoring. It might be just as hard to tackle as it is, to move on offense. And maybe that's why. Maybe there's more missed tackles when it's cold outside, or whatever narrative you want to say. But the temperature does not affect scoring at cold levels. Now, there has been some testing to show that when games are in the 90, close to 100 degrees heat index, those games can be lower scoring because I think players just get tired and the game just doesn't move as fast. But when we're talking about these very, very cold games, it doesn't have an effect on scoring. So our model favors the Chiefs by 3.0 with a predicted total of 48.7, and we like the over here.
All right, I love it. Well, let's switch it over to the injury watch, and the Browns will be facing a much different Texans team compared to what they saw back in Week 16 when they were playing without starters on defense, Will Anderson and Blake Cashman, and they were also without CJ Stroud.
Yeah, and Case Keenum came in for those two starts when they were without Stroud and averaged just 3.9 yards per pass play. And Stroud averaged 7 yards per pass play his rookie year. That's third in the NFL. I mean, what a coming out party for CJ Stroud. Now, quarterbacks making their first playoff start are just 22, 36, and 1 against the spread since 2002. And Stroud will be going against a Browns defense conceding a league low negative 0.19 EPA per dropback. So it's not looking good for Stroud from that perspective. Now, I do think he will be kept more clean than most quarterbacks against the Browns because he'll have left tackle Laramie Tunsil, who ranks 7th in pass blocking efficiency, to kind of, contain or neutralize Myles Garrett. I think that's going to be a hell of a battle on Stroud's blind side this week. But, the track record for quarterbacks making their first playoff start kind of speaks for itself here.
All right, well, it looks like the Packers will be returning Christian Watson this week. What are you expecting to see from him?
Well, this is a big week for Christian Watson to return because Dallas has a league-high 40.5% man coverage rate, and Christian Watson is the Packers' best man-beating wide receiver. He's averaging 1.44 more yards per route run versus man coverage than Packers' backup wide receiver, Romeo Doubs. And so we've seen Love have a hell of an end to the season. He's second in EPA per play since Week 16, but most of those have been against zone-heavy defense. And Love's yards per attempt against man this season is just 73% of his yards per attempt against zone coverage, 29th in the league. But if we kind of zoom out and look at the games where he's had Watson on the field against man defenses, or against defenses with man coverage ranks above 30%, he's averaged 6.8 yards per pass play. So that's pretty solid, because Watson is the best man-beating wide receiver. When Watson was not on the field against the Saints and Giants, those man-heavy defenses, Love averaged just 5.2 yards per pass play. So I guess I'm not convinced that Love can't beat man coverage when he has Watson out there, but I guess we'll see this week.
Yeah, we're going to find out. But how are the matchups for the rest of the Green Bay receivers?
Well, I like it for Dontavian Wicks also. So his most common route this season is a slant route. That's about 18% of his routes. And he's really come on in the second half of the season, averaging 2.7 yards per route run. And the Cowboys' most frequent coverage is that cover one. We talked about how much man they run. And that coverage is most vulnerable to slants. If you guys remember that Seahawks-Cowboys game from a few weeks ago, the Seahawks were killing the Cowboys on slant routes. So if Wicks is going to run a ton of slants, I like what he can do. I also like what Jaden Reed can do on the inside. He's 5th in yards per route run in the slot this season, and he'll be going against nickelback Jordan Lewis, who's 22nd out of 29 qualifying nickelbacks in yards allowed per cover snap in the slot. So I really just think there's going to be a lot of quick routes, a lot of man-beating routes to Watson, Wicks, and Reed versus this Dallas coverage. And I think those quick routes will also help them negate the pass rush that Dallas is so dangerous with up front.
All right, well, let's shift it over to our next segment. We've got the weather of the week, and what's standing out to you?
Well, the big weather game this week is in Buffalo. It's projected to have the highest wind speeds for a game this season, and there's also possibly some snow. But I believe strong-arm Josh Allen will be able to throw through these conditions. I mean, he averaged 6.4 yards per pass play in Week 16 last year versus the Bears with 30-mile-per-hour sustained winds, and it's only projected to be about 20 miles per hour sustained for this game.
All right, well, it's looking like Gabe Davis might be out, so do you think this is going to be a big-time Stephon Diggs game?
Yeah, I do. And there was a little bit of talk that Stephon Diggs might be getting phased out of the offense. He had less than 66% of the snaps for 3 consecutive games from week 15 to 17 after not doing so prior to that in the entire season. So it looked like they were phasing him out a little bit, but his snap rate was up to 88% last week. And I expect Allen to highlight Diggs versus this Steelers defense because of the way they play coverage. The Steelers have the second highest cover 3 rate in the NFL. And what that means is the outside cornerbacks are trying to get depth early on, making that coverage susceptible to curl routes. And Stephon Diggs' most popular route is a curl. So I think it's going to be a huge game for Stephon Diggs, particularly in this wind. Allen will be wanting to throw shorter anyways. Curl routes are perfect for that. So look for Stephon Diggs' curl routes on Sunday.
All right. Yeah. It looks like you go more into that game with our next segment here. And we've got stock up, stock down. Whose stock are you buying right now?
I'm going to be buying Josh Allen's protection. So the Steelers have the 6th highest blitz rate in the NFL, and they might send extra pass rushers more often to compensate for the loss of edge rusher TJ Watt, who led the NFL with 19 sacks, but will be out this week. And Watt is the most valuable player on the Steelers. According to our metrics, he's worth 2.2 points. So that's already a knock against the Steelers pass rush. And then Buffalo's offensive line is well equipped to pick up these Steelers blitzes because they've spent so much time together communicating all sorts of different games that defenses are run against them this year. They've the starters have played 95% of the snaps for the Bills this year. That's insane to have the same group out there that much. Just 9 offenses had the same line combination for 50% of the snaps. And the Bills had 95%. And then Deion Dawkins ranks 11th in pass rushing efficiency, and he'll be able to contain edge rusher Alex Highsmith, who's, the Steelers' next best guy, and because he's 13th in pressures, but I don't think he'll have a good game across from Dawkins.
Yeah, and Cameron Hayward really hasn't looked right since that groin surgery he had in September.
Yeah, he came back in week 9. He's averaging just 1.7 pressures per game, and that's compared to last year's 3.4 pressures per game. So Hayward is not a Pro Bowl caliber guy anymore. And I don't know if that's because of the groin surgery or just because he's getting old. So I'm not expecting much from Hayward this week. And the Bills offensive line conceded a league low 12 sacks this year. So no Watt, Highsmith, bottled up by Dawkins. I don't think that they're going to be able to get to Josh Allen much at all.
All right. Well, that does not sound too good for the Steelers defense, but whose stock are you selling this week?
I'm going to be selling Mason Rudolph stock. So Kenny Pickett averaged 5.5 yards per pass play this year. Mitch Trubisky, 5.2. It's no surprise that Tomlin is sticking with Rudolph, who's averaging 8.5 yards per pass play. So, from his perspective, it's, Rudolph has been by far the best, but he's went against a cupcake set of opposing defenses. The Seahawks, 27th in dropback success rate allowed. The Bengals, 29th in dropback success rate allowed. And then the Ravens had their backups on the field for that week 18 game.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think about Rudolph's matchup in this week with the high winds you were talking about earlier?
Well, I think the Bills cornerbacks are going to be able to contain Pittsburgh's wide receivers. Rasul Douglas is 15th in yards per cover snap allowed, and he has that size to match up with George Pickens. And Douglas left last week's game nursing a knee injury, but he said he's confident he'll be on the field this week. So I think he'll be able to take away Pickens. And then Deontay Johnson will struggle across from Christian Beneford, who's 16th in yards per cover snap allowed.
Yeah, and we talked about last week how Buffalo's pass rush is really coming around for that postseason run.
Yeah, so we mentioned this on last week's pod, but they got back defensive tackle Daquan Jones in week 17, and he ranks 7th in pass rushing efficiency in the 6 weeks he's been on the field this season with more than 5 snaps. And he's a force alongside interior defender Ed Oliver, who's 4th in pressure. So those two are going to wreak havoc across from Pittsburgh center Mason Cole, who ranks 5th worst in pass blocking efficiency. And there's further concerns for Rudolph's protection as left tackle Dan Moore is surrendering a league-high 11% pressure rate, and he is not going to be able to stay in front of Gregory Rousseau, who's 14th in pass rushing efficiency.
Yeah, it looks like this might finally be the week that George Pickens unfollows Mason Rudolph on Instagram. But let's shift it over to our DraftKings player of the slate. Who do you got lined up for us this week?
So for the Saturday Millie Maker slate, I'm mostly going to want to fade the weather bros that think it's going to be too cold to score in Kansas City and do some stacks for that Chiefs-Dolphins game. But I'll throw in a player that you could use from Browns-Texans as well, and that is Amari Cooper at 6,800. So Cooper missed the last 2 games of the regular season, but, week 18, all the Browns were sitting. So he said he could have played in week 18 if he had to. So I think, he's not practicing this week, but I think that's just due to rest. And Cooper will be pretty much a full go on Saturday.
So we think Joe Flacco's going to sling it against this Houston defense?
Well, the Texans are allowing a league low 33% rush success rate. So I definitely think they're going to air it out. Head coach Kevin Stefanski has called plenty of dropbacks. Flacco is averaging 42.4 dropbacks per start. I mean, Stefanski's he brought him in and just started riding him right away. Now, Cleveland tight end David Njoku is leading the NFL, averaging 2.38 yards per route run in his 5 games with Flacco. But Houston's defense is allowing 0.21 EPA per target less versus tight ends than wide receivers. So I don't know that Njoku is going to be able to continue that hot streak he's had with Flacco. And that's why I'm looking at Amari Cooper to do the damage across from Steven Nelson and Derek Stingley. Those cornerbacks don't really scare me. So I like Amari Cooper at 6,800 on DraftKings this week.
I like that one. Well, let's shift it over to our primetime preview. We've got the LA Rams versus the Detroit Lions. I mean, this is going to be such a good matchup. We got Stafford versus Goff. I mean, this is the perfect storyline from the script writers, and no one knows Goff better than McVay. But let's talk about the Rams. It was not long ago when they were sitting at a record of just 3-6. What flipped for them?
Well, they're 7-1 since the bye week, and it would make sense that this team would get better in the second half of the season, considering they're starting 8 first or second year players, right? Those guys should be improving with more coaching and familiarity with NFL schemes. Now, the only loss they've had since the bye week was that overtime game in Baltimore. So that's not necessarily a bad loss to lose on a punt return like that. And the Rams are averaging 29.3 points per game since the bye, excluding last week with Carson Wentz under center.
Yeah, what do you think the Rams are going to be looking for on offense this week?
Well, it starts with running back Kyren Williams, who leads the league, averaging 95 yards on the ground per game, but he is going to be limited this week. The Lions defense ranks 4th in EPA per rush allowed. So I think Sean McVay is going to depend on Matthew Stafford, who should be kept clean in this game. So the Rams offensive line doesn't look elite on the surface. They allowed 206 pressures this year, but 50 of those pressures came in 2 games, and they rank 4th in pass blocking efficiency since the bye week. And then the one thing you have to worry about in terms of pass rush for the Lions is Detroit edge defender Aiden Hutchinson, who was the 5th player since 2006 to have at least 100 pressures in a season. Now, you get the extra game to do it, but that's still a very impressive season for Detroit's top pick in last season's draft. But he'll line up across from the Rams' best offensive lineman, right tackle Rob Havenstein, who ranks 10th in pass blocking efficiency.
Yeah, it is worth mentioning that the Lions defense is getting healthier here. I mean, last week they got back starting safety CJ Gardner-Johnson and starting defender Ellen McNeil, who ranked 2nd on Detroit's defense with 34 pressures despite missing 4 games this year. So I thought that was worth mentioning, but let's shift it over to the Lions offense.
So Detroit's offense averaged 5.9 yards per play this season. That's third in the NFL, and it jumped to 6.5 yards per play for the 47% of snaps with the current offensive line combination. So your initial instinct is, well, maybe this offense is a little bit underrated due to how they performed with those backup offensive linemen in there. Although I'm a little bit concerned about Jared Goff's protection in this game because the Rams, arguably their two best players on defense, are Aaron Donald and Kobe Turner. Both are interior defenders. They combined for 131 pressures. It's the most of any interior tandem in the NFL. And the Lions' worst players on the offensive line are guards Graham Glasgow and Jonah Jackson. Neither of those guys was above average in pass blocking efficiency.
All right, well, looking at the passing game, what do you think the Lions are going to need to do to be able to move the ball, especially without Sam Laporta out there?
Yeah, that's a big loss. Laporta, fifth in success rate among tight ends. He's worth 0.8 points by our metrics. And the other kind of going under the radar loss is they could also be without starting wide receiver Khalif Raymond, who averaged 2.07 yards per route run, while the other outside wide receivers for the Lions, Jamison Williams and Donovan Peoples-Jones, combined to average just 0.96 yards per route run. So over a yard per route run less than Khalif Raymond. He's been an under the radar force for the Lions offense this season. So then you're like, all right, well, no Raymond, no Laporta. That's got to be a healthy dose of Amon-Ra St. Brown. But the Rams nickelback Quentin Lake has been pretty solid this year. He's fifth in yards per cover snap allowed in the slot. Now, I think Amon-Ra is a better player than Quentin Lake. I'm not worried about Amon-Ra getting shut down, but you certainly wouldn't call it a favorable matchup for St. Brown in this game.
Yeah, well, I think this is going to be such a fun game to watch. I mean, the media is just eating this storyline up of Goff versus McVay. But do you think this is actually going to have any impact on the game?
Well, I think it is. I think it's somewhat of an elephant in the room. So McVay, he's more familiar with Goff's deficiency than anyone in the league. And I think he'll be more involved in the defensive game planning this week than usual to make sure that Goff looks uncomfortable. And the Lions have just a 2.6% PFF turnover worthy play rate this year. That's the fifth lowest in the league. But I think if, McVay can present Goff with some looks that he knows will get him jittery and into bad Jared Goff, then there might be more turnovers for the Lions offense on Sunday night. So our model makes this game Detroit by 3.3 with the predicted total of 53.3.
All right, so not really any value on the side or total this week, but let's look at the primetime prop. And last week, you gave out James Cook under 63.5 rushing yards, and that was a smash. But what do you have for us this week?
This week, I'm going with Demarcus Robinson over 41.5 receiving yards. So let's go through Stafford's receiving options because we think he's going to have a big game here. And I do not think it's going to be a Tyler Higbee game because the Lions are 8th in EPA per target allowed to tight ends, and they just got back safety CJ Gardner-Johnson. Brian Branch, a nickelback, is by far Detroit's best player in coverage, and he'll mostly be lined up across from Cooper Kupp. And I don't typically like to back rookies in their first playoff game. So you're looking at outside receivers. It's not going to be Puka. That's Demarcus Robinson, and he's gone over this prop in 5 of his last 7 starts since the bye week.
All right. Well, I think that will do it for our Super Wildcard Weekend episode.
Yep, we didn't touch on the Eagles-Buccaneers game because there could be a release for the service. We're waiting on some injuries and weather for that game to become a little bit more clear. And if you want more props, I'll be firing those out to clients as well. Since I've been at Dr. Bob Sports, we're 43-23 on postseason prop bet releases.
Yeah, I am so fired up for the playoffs and all these great matchups that we are going to get over the next month.
Yeah, the storylines are so insane already. We have Tyreek coming back to Arrowhead. We talked about Stafford returning to Detroit, Goff versus McVay, and it's possible next week we get Joe Flacco in Baltimore and a Cowboys-Eagles rubber match.
Oh, I mean, the script writers are doing a fantastic job this season. But if you're looking for more content, head over to drbobsports.com where you can see the rest of the NFL write-ups and check out the college basketball model that is releasing picks every day at 9:30 a.m. Eastern. So go ahead, leave us a thumbs up if you're enjoying the content, and we will be back next Friday to talk the divisional round of the playoffs.